She rejected the world's best security expert and was kidnapped hours later. His only way in was to join them. This is the rescue mission where the savior had to play the villain. The first time Chase Thorne saw Sofia Valdez, she was firing him. He stood, a monument of quiet composure, in the airy, white-on-white expanse of her Soho art gallery, the modern eye. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing around Picassos and Rothkos as if they were common confetti. The air smelled of money, lemon polish, and astringent disdain, the latter emanating entirely from the woman behind the vast, fossilized limestone desk. "Let me be perfectly clear, Mr. Thorne," Sofia said, her voice a low, cultured cello string pulled taut. "I appreciate my father's concern, but I do not appreciate his attempt to insert a gargoyle into my life." Chase didn't flinch. He was accustomed to being called worse. At 6'4", with a build that strained the seams of his tailored suit and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and then weathered by a few particularly unforgiving storms, Gargoyle was, in some lights, apartment his role was to protect, to perch, to intimidate. He was very good at it. "My team and I are here to ensure your safety, Miss Valdez," he replied, his tone neutral, professional. It was the voice he used to talk billionaires off ledges and out of war zones. "The threat against your family's collection is credible. The auction of the Eyes of the Ancients has made you a target." The Eyes of the Ancients was not a single piece, but a collection of 7 pre-Columbian funerary masks, each inlaid with hypnotic spheres of obsidian and jade. Together, they were rumored to be worth over $500 million. Sofia, the head curator of the Valdez Foundation, was their fierce guardian and the public face of their exhibition. She rose, a vision of sharp angles and elegant fury. She was taller than he'd expected, willowy, with dark hair swept into a severe knot that only accentuated the elegant lines of her neck and the defiant spark in her espresso dark eyes. She wore a black designer dress that was itself a piece of architecture. "I am aware of the value of the pieces in my care. I am also aware that my father's solution to every problem is to throw money and muscle at it until it disappears." She walked around the desk, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm on the polished concrete floor. She stopped a few feet from him, close enough for him to see the gold flecks in her irises. "I will not have my life suffocated by a phalanx of men in black suits who see every art lover as a potential assassin. This is a gallery, not a military compound." "My methods are discreet," Chase countered, though his mind was already calculating the vulnerabilities in the room, the large windows, the single, inattentive security guard at the front door, the alleyway access from the loading bay. "You would hardly know we were here." "I would know," she stated, her gaze unwavering. "I can feel a stare from across a crowded room. I can sense the weight of expectation. I will not live my life under a microscope, or worse, under your obvious and undoubtedly condescending supervision. I built this gallery's reputation on openness, on accessibility, not fear. A healthy degree of fear can be a powerful survival tool, Miss Valdez. So can a healthy degree of self-reliance," she shot back. "I have spent my entire life fighting to be seen as more than Eduardo Valdez's daughter, more than a porcelain doll to be placed on a secure shelf. I have a black belt in Krav Maga. I have a security system in my home that would make a nuclear silo blush. I am not a damsel in distress, Mr. Thorne." Chase said nothing. He had read her file. He knew about the Krav Maga. He also knew that skill and preparedness were often the first illusions to shatter when real, brutal violence began. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw, the absolute conviction in her eyes. This wasn't just a refusal, it was a principle. "The threat is not against you personally." He tried a different tack, a final effort. "It's against the collection. My presence is to safeguard your father's assets." A cold smile touched her lips. "Then you can tell my father that his assets are perfectly capable of safeguarding themselves. The decision is made. Your services are declined. Thank you for your time." She turned her back on him, a dismissal as absolute as it was foolish. She returned to her desk and picked up a sleek silver letter opener, examining it as if it were a far more interesting artifact than he was. Chase stood for a moment longer, a silent sentinel in the sun-drenched room. He had a dozen arguments on his tongue, each more logical and compelling than the last. But he knew a lost cause when he saw one. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "As you wish, Miss Valdez." He turned and walked out, the glass door whispering shut behind him. Outside, on the bustling Spring Street sidewalk, his second-in-command, Lena, fell into step beside him. She didn't need to ask. His expression told her everything. "She kicked us to the curb, didn't she?" Lena said, her voice laced with a frustration that mirrored his own. "She did." "And the father?" "He's going to blow a gasket." Eduardo Valdez pays our retainer. He does not dictate our methodology for a non-client. She has made her choice. Chase's voice was cold, final. He pulled out his phone and sent a single, coded message to his operations center. Package refused. Stand down. He believed in client autonomy. He believed in the right to make your own mistakes. But as he slid into the back of the anonymous black SUV idling at the curb, a cold knot of foreboding tightened in his gut. He had seen the intelligence reports. The group interested in the eyes was not a sophisticated Ocean's 11-style crew. They were brutal, pragmatic, and known for their messy extraction methods. They wouldn't see Sofia Valdez as a formidable curator. They would see her as a key to be broken if necessary. He had offered her a shield. She had chosen a target. 3 days later, the call came. Chase was in his operations center, a nondescript high-rise in Midtown that hummed with the quiet energy of 100 screens and the world's most advanced surveillance tech. He was reviewing a threat assessment for a tech CEO in Silicon Valley when Lena's voice cut through the low murmur, sharp and urgent. "Boss, you need to see this. Valdez Gallery, now." The main screen flickered to a live news feed. A helicopter shot, shaky and dramatic, showed the block containing the modern eye. Police cars, their lights painting the buildings in frantic swirls of blue and red, cordoned off the street. The ticker at the bottom of the screen read, "Art Heiress kidnapped in brazen daylight gallery heist." The cold knot in Chase's gut turned to ice. His personal line buzzed. The caller ID showed a private number, but he knew. He answered. Thorne. The voice on the other end was a raw, broken thing, a far cry from the powerful baritone of the shipping magnate he'd met with days before. "Thorne, they took her. They took my Sofia." Eduardo Valdez choked back a sob. They walked in, like they owned the place. They beat old Ben, the guard. They put a bag over her head. My little girl." Chase closed his eyes. The images flashed behind his lids. Not the news feed, but his own professional, clinical assessment. The large windows, the single guard, the loading bay. "What do they want?" Chase asked, his voice dangerously calm. "The collection. They sent a video. They have her. God, Chase, they have her in some dark room. She's scared." The man was crumbling. "You have to get her back. Name your price. Anything. I don't care. Just get my daughter back." "I'll call you back in 10 minutes. Chase ended the call and turned to Lena. "Get me everything. Traffic cams, satellite overwatch, witness statements, the video they sent. I want to know who these people are before the police do." The room erupted into controlled chaos. Keyboards clacked. Voices rose, calling out data points. Chase stood motionless in the eye of the storm, his mind already shifting, adapting, discarding the rulebook. The police would be methodical. They would negotiate. They would set up perimeters and wait. These men, whoever they were, would not be patient. They would use fear and pain to get what they wanted. Sofia's principles would be tested against tools she couldn't possibly comprehend. A screen lit up with the kidnapper's video. It was grainy, shot on a cheap phone. Sofia was on her knees, her hands bound behind her. The bag was off her head now. Her hair was disheveled. A dark bruise was blossoming on her cheekbone. But her eyes, those defiant, espresso-dark eyes, blazed with a terror she was fighting desperately to control. A man's voice, gruff and heavily accented, spoke off-camera, listing the demands. Chase didn't hear the words. He was watching her. He saw the slight tremble in her lower lip, the rapid rise and fall of her chest. He saw the damsel in the distress, a role she would have rather died than play. And he saw his failure. He had allowed her principle to override his duty. He had walked away. Lena approached, her tablet in hand. Preliminary ID on the lead voice. Matches a known associate of Karpov's crew, Nico. Nasty piece of work. Ex-Spetsnaz went private. They're muscle for hire, no finesse. They'll have her stashed in a secondary location, probably moving her soon. Chase's phone buzzed again. Valdez. He ignored it. The standard playbook was useless. A direct assault was impossible without knowing her exact location. A ransom drop would likely end with Sofia dead in a ditch. Negotiation would only buy time, not her safety. There was only one path, a dangerous, high-stakes gambit that went against every protocol his multi-billion-dollar company was built on. "Lena," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I need a full work, up on Nico and his known associates, recruitment patterns, safe houses, everything, and get me a burn phone, untraceable." Lena's eyes widened slightly. "Sir, what's the play?" Chase finally turned from the screen, his gaze glacial, his resolve absolute. "The play is, I'm applying for a job. They wanted a cold-hearted mercenary. That's exactly what they're going to get." The billionaire security expert was going underground. and the woman who hated the very sight of him was about to meet her most ruthless captor. The world Chase Thorne infiltrated was one of grime, stale cigarette smoke, and paranoia. It was a world away from the sterile, sun-drenched gallery and his own high-tech command center. The safe house was a squalid second-floor apartment above a butcher shop in Red Hook, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the damp rot of decaying wood. His new identity was Ivor, a disgraced ex-FSB operative from Vladivostok, looking for lucrative, off-the-books work. The backstory, woven by his team from a tapestry of real ghosts and fabricated sins, was bulletproof. His accent was a convincing, guttural growl. His demeanor was that of a man who had seen too much and felt too little. Nico, the crew's leader, was a bull of a man with a shaved head and eyes like chips of flint. He sat at a rickety kitchen table, cleaning a Makarov pistol with slow, meticulous care, while two of his men, a wiry, nervous guy called Stitches and a hulking brute named Bear, watched Chase with open suspicion. "Ivor," Nico said, not looking up from his weapon. "You come highly recommended, by people who would be displeased if you were a problem." Chase said nothing. He stood with his arms loose at his sides, his posture relaxed but ready. He'd traded his bespoke suit for a worn leather jacket and jeans that smelled of a stranger's sweat. He let a fraction of his own coiled violence show in his eyes, just enough to be convincing, not enough to be a challenge. "The job is simple," Nico continued, finally looking up. His gaze was a physical weight. "We have a valuable package. We are waiting for instructions for the exchange. Your job is to make sure the package remains secure and compliant until then." "Compliance is not my specialty," Chase grunted in his Ivor voice. "Security is." A grim smile touched Nico's lips. "Good, the package has spirit, too much." She tried to kick Bear in the balls. He nodded toward the giant, who smirked and rubbed a meaty hand over his jaw. She did not succeed. "But it is irritating. You look like a man who can inspire quiet." "Where is the package?" Chase asked, his heart a cold, hard drum in his chest. Nico jerked his head toward a reinforced door down the hall. "See for yourself, then we talk money." The walk down the short hallway felt like a mile. Chase's every sense was screaming, hyper-aware of the number of men, the weapons, the exits, the weaknesses. He schooled his features into a mask of bored indifference. Lena's voice was a whisper in his mind, fed through a nearly invisible receiver in his ear. "Biosigns are stable, audio is patchy, visual confirmation is your priority. Do not engage." He turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was small, dark, and smelled of mold and despair. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a weak, jaundiced light. And there, on a bare mattress shoved into the corner, was Sofia. She was curled into herself, knees drawn to her chest. Her elegant black dress was torn at the shoulder and smudged with dirt. The bruise on her cheek had deepened to an ugly purple. Her hands were bound with zip ties in front of her, and a new, livid red mark circled her wrist where she had clearly struggled against them. She looked smaller than she had in the gallery, the fierce architecture of her pride crumbling under the weight of raw fear. But when the door opened, her head snapped up. The defiance was still there, banked like embers beneath the ash of her terror. She was ready to fight, even now. Then her eyes met his. Chase saw the sequence of emotions flash across her face in a split second. First, a jolt of startled recognition, her brows furrowed, confusion wiping away the fear. Him? The gargoyle from the gallery? Then, a dawning, horrific understanding. Her eyes widened, scanning his new persona, the rough clothes, the cold eyes, the air of belonging in this hellhole. The embers of defiance were snuffed out, replaced by a chilling, absolute betrayal. The look she gave him wasn't just one of hatred, it was one of utter, soul-crushing devastation. She had refused his protection, and he had, in her eyes, chosen to join her captors out of spite. She looked away, tucking her chin against her knees, presenting him with the back of her head. A silent, profound dismissal. It was 1,000 times worse than any scream of fury. Chase's gut twisted. Every instinct screamed at him to go to her, to whisper his true purpose, to break the ties around her wrists and carry her out of there. But he was a professional. He was Ivor. He let his gaze sweep the room with clinical disinterest, the boarded-up window, the bucket in the corner, the single bottle of water on the floor. He noted it all, his mind cataloging every detail for both his cover and her survival. He grunted, a sound of pure disdain, and slammed the door shut. The sound of the bolt sliding home was the loudest thing he had ever heard. Back in the main room, he turned to Nico. "She is soft, spoiled, a problem waiting to happen," Nico chuckled. "Like I said, spirit. Spirit gets people killed," Chase said flatly. "I'll take the watch, double my rate for the extra risk." Nico's eyes narrowed, calculating. He saw a mercenary seeing a weakness and exploiting it for cash. It was a language he understood. He nodded slowly. Done. But if she becomes more trouble than she's worth, we solve the problem. Understood? The threat was clear. Chase gave a single sharp nod. Understood. The psychological chess game had begun. His first move was to establish his credibility as one of them. He took the first watch outside her door, sitting on a rickety stool, his posture the very picture of alert boredom. He listened to the men talk, learning their rhythms, their hierarchies. Stitches was the tech guy, jumpy and arrogant. Bear was pure muscle, dumb and violent. Nico was the brains, cold and pragmatic. His second move was to start subtly shaping the environment. He complained about the stink from the butcher shop, convincing Bear to move the mattress a few inches farther from the damp external wall. A small thing, but it was marginally drier. He found an old, musty blanket in a closet and tossed it into her room without a word. His actions those of a man preserving an asset from sickness, not showing compassion. The hardest part was the silence. He could not speak to her. He could not offer reassurance. He could only be her jailer. Sofia, for her part, was a heartbreaking mix of bravery and despair. She flinched when Bear brought her food. She stared with hollow-eyed hatred at Chase whenever he opened the door. Once, when Stitches entered to taunt her with details of the ransom demand, Chase saw her hand clench around a loose nail she had presumably pried from the floorboards. A pathetic weapon, but a weapon nonetheless. His pride in her resourcefulness warred with a fresh wave of fear. If they found it, his moment to make a tangible move came on the second night. Nico had decided it was time for a motivational video to send to her father. He ordered Chase to bring her out. Chase entered the room. Sofia shrank back against the wall, her eyes wide with fresh terror. "Get up," he growled in his Ivor voice. She didn't move. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm but carefully calibrated not to bruise, and hauled her to her feet. As he did, he leaned in close, his back to the door, his mouth near her ear. His body blocked the view of the others. For a fraction of a second his mask slipped. His eyes met hers, and he tried to pour every ounce of promise, of unspoken intent, into that one look. "Hold on. Trust me." Her breath hitched. Confusion flickered in her gaze, quickly buried under a fresh wave of anger. She wrenched her arm away. "Don't touch me," she spat, her voice hoarse from disuse. He marched her into the main room. Nico had his phone set up on a tripod. "Smile for daddy, princess," he sneered. The performance was brutal. Nico backhanded her to the ground to make her crying more authentic. Chase stood statue still, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists behind his back, every fiber of his being screaming to intervene. He was Ivor. Ivor would enjoy this. So he allowed a cold, cruel smile to touch his lips. The expression felt like acid on his skin. Afterward, he was ordered to put her back. As he guided her, stumbling, down the hall, he felt the tremors racking her body. He shoved her into the room, and as he did, his hand slipped something from his sleeve into the pocket of his jacket, which he then accidentally let fall just inside the door. He slammed the door, bolting it. Now lying on the floor just inside her prison was a protein bar from his tactical gear and a small, flexible blade, a credit card knife, useless against a gun but perfect for sawing through plastic zip ties. It was a risk. She could use it foolishly, get herself killed. She could see it as another cruel trick. But he had to give her a tool. He had to give her hope. He returned to his post, listening. He heard the rustle of fabric. A long, dead silence. Then, the faintest, most desperate sound of a sob, quickly stifled. The game continued. He was the wolf in the fold, guarding the lamb, his teeth bared at his own pack. And the lamb, heartbroken and alone, now held a secret weapon dropped by her most hated captor. The board was set. The most dangerous moves were yet to come. The protein bar and the blade changed everything. It lay on the floor where he'd dropped it. Was it a trick? A test? She stared at it for what felt like hours, her mind racing. The man was a monster, but he was a meticulous one. He didn't seem the type to accidentally drop anything. Hunger and desperation eventually overruled caution. When the sounds from the main room indicated a shift change, Bear's loud snoring replaced by Stitches' nervous pacing, she crept forward. Her bound hands fumbled with the pocket, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her fingers closed around the solid shape of the protein bar and the slim, cold metal of the blade. A sob of relief, sharp and painful, caught in her throat. She scrambled back to her mattress, hiding her treasures beneath the ragged blanket. She devoured the protein bar in 3 ravenous bites, the burst of energy feeling like a lifeline thrown into a stormy sea. The blade was a different matter. It was hope. It was danger. It was a question. Why? Why would he give her this? The image of his face, so close to hers in the hallway, flashed in her mind. The look in his eyes hadn't been cruel. It had been intense, pleading even. She had been so sure it was a trick of the light, a projection of her own desperate hope. But now, armed with this tangible proof, she began to doubt her own certainty. The Chase Thorne she'd met in her gallery had been overbearing, condescending, a symbol of everything she rebelled against. But he had also been, undeniably, professional. The man on the news was a titan of security, a legend who protected presidents and CEOs. Would that man truly resort to a petty criminal vendetta over a fired client? A new, terrifying possibility began to dawn, so audacious it made her dizzy. What if he wasn't here for revenge? What if he was here for her? The thought was a seismic shift in her reality. It meant his coldness was a performance. His cruelty was an act. Every time he had looked at her with disdain, he had been playing a part. The realization was followed by a surge of guilt so potent it stole her breath. She had looked at him with pure, unadulterated hatred. She had believed the worst of him instantly. That night, when he opened the door to slide a bottle of water and a piece of dry bread across the floor, she didn't look away. She held his gaze. Her heart was a frantic bird in a cage, but she forced herself to be still. She searched his eyes for the man beneath the mask, for any crack in the icy facade. He paused, his hand on the door. His eyes, those storm-gray eyes, flickered down to her hands, then back to her face. It was the most minute of movements, a question. "Have you found it? Are you ready?" She gave an almost imperceptible nod, her own eyes answering. "Yes, I understand." It was the smallest of connections, a thread of silent communication stretched taut across a chasm of danger. But it was enough. He closed the door. And for the first time since her capture, Sofia Valdez did not feel entirely alone. He began to create opportunities. He would argue with Nico about security, convincing him that keeping her hands bound at all times was causing circulation issues that would devalue the asset. Nico, seeing logic, not compassion, agreed to allow her hands free when she ate, under direct supervision. It was a small victory, a window of time where her hands could practice with the hidden blade. He accidentally left the bolt on her door slightly misaligned one night after a check, making the sound of it sliding home seem final, when in fact it wasn't fully engaged. She waited for hours, listening to the rhythm of his breathing on the other side of the door, understanding it was a signal, a test of her nerve. She didn't take the bait, it was too soon. But she knew it was there. He used his watch to subtly manipulate the others. When Bear, bored and malicious, decided to entertain himself by tormenting her, Chase would intervene not by defending her, but by giving the larger man a more appealing task. Nico wants the car checked. Now. His authority, even in his undercover role, was enough to redirect Bear's simple mind. Sofia in turn learned to play her part in their silent dance. She began to lean into the role of a broken captive. She let her shoulders slump. She cried on cue, her sobs now a tool to sell their performance. She saved her strength, her energy, her defiance for the moment it would matter. She saw the way he watched the others, the slight tension in his shoulders when Nico received a new message, the way his eyes constantly mapped the room. He was planning something. She had to be ready. The tension between them transformed. The electric charge of hatred was still there, but it was now layered with something else entirely, a terrifying, intimate trust. Her life was in the hands of a man she could not speak to, a man whose every look and gesture she had to interpret correctly on a knife's edge. His safety depended on her ability to convincingly despise him. The romantic tension, a spark she would have angrily dismissed days before, now became an unavoidable force. It was in the way her breath caught when his fingers briefly brushed hers as he handed her a water bottle. It was in the protective way his body subtly positioned itself between her and the others during the tense waiting hours. It was in the agonizing wait for his eyes to meet hers again, for another fleeting moment of silent communion in their world of lies. The waiting was the worst part. The ransom negotiations with her father were dragging, and Nico's patience was wearing thin. The atmosphere in the safe house grew darker, more volatile. "This is taking too long," Nico snarled one evening, throwing his phone onto the stained couch. "The old man is stalling. He needs a stronger incentive." His gaze landed on Sofia, curled on her mattress. The look in his eyes was no longer one of cold business. It was one of impending violence. Chase, who was cleaning his own issued pistol, didn't look up. "Kill her and you have nothing. You have a corpse and a very angry, very powerful man with nothing left to lose." "I'm not talking about killing her," Nico said, a sinister smile playing on his lips. "I'm talking about sending him a piece of her, an ear perhaps, to focus his mind." Sofia's blood ran cold. She couldn't stop the whimper that escaped her lips. Chase finally looked up. His expression was still that of Ivor, bored and pragmatic, But Sofia, who was now an expert in the micro-expressions of his face, saw the glacier cracking. She saw the lethal fury banked deep in his eyes. "A messy, emotional victim makes for bad video," Chase stated, his voice a low rumble. "You want her scared, not catatonic. You start cutting, and she shuts down. The father panics, does something stupid, and the money disappears. It's amateur." Nico's eyes narrowed. He was being challenged. "You think you know better?" "I know that fear is a tool," Chase said, standing up. He towered over even Nico. "But you have to measure the dose. We are professionals, not butchers." He took a step closer, his presence dominating the room. "Give it until morning. If the money isn't moving by then, you can do what you want. But you'll be doing it without me. I don't work with amateurs who let their tempers cost them a payday." It was a breathtaking risk, a direct challenge to Nico's authority, couched in the language of greed and professionalism. The room went dead silent. Stitches stopped typing. Bear stopped chewing his food. Sofia held her breath, her hand creeping under the blanket to close around the cool handle of the credit card knife. Nico stared at Chase, his jaw working. The seconds stretched, taut and deadly. Finally, he let out a short, harsh laugh. "Fine, until morning." He pointed a thick finger at Chase. "But if the money isn't there, you'll be the one to take the ear, to prove you're not soft." Chase gave a slow, cold smile. "It would be my pleasure." The immediate threat was postponed, but the clock was now screaming in Sofia's head. Until morning. The noose had tightened. The psychological chess game was over. The endgame was here. Chase had just bet everything on a 12-hour window. She looked at him, her would-be protector playing the role of her potential mutilator, and knew with chilling certainty that the time for waiting was over. Their escape had to be tonight. The deadline was no longer an abstract concept. It was a ticking bomb with Sofia's name on it. Chase took the first watch, his back against her door, his posture the very picture of Ivor's alert indolence. But his mind was a war room, running simulations, assessing variables. The 12-hour reprieve was a gift and a curse. It gave him time to finalize a plan he'd been constructing since he first walked in, but it also heightened the risk of Nico's paranoia boiling over prematurely. Inside her room, Sofia was a live wire of nervous energy. The protein bar and the blade had been a promise, but Chase's cold offer to take her ear had felt like a betrayal all over again. It took every ounce of her will to replay the scene in her head, to see it not through her own terror, but through the lens of his cover. He had stopped Nico. He had bought them time. The brutal offer was a performance, a ghastly piece of theater to maintain his credibility. Logically, she knew this. Emotionally, it was a fresh wound. She clutched the credit card knife, her fingers tracing its sharp edge in the dark. "Trust me," his eyes had said. Could she? Her life depended on the answer. Hours bled into one another. The sounds from the main room faded. Stitches' nervous tapping on his laptop ceased, replaced by the low murmur of a talk radio station. Bear's snoring became a rhythmic, guttural sawing. Nico was still awake, pacing occasionally, the floorboards creaking under his weight. Then, a new sound, a faint, rhythmic tapping on her door. Not the random scrape of a shoe, but a deliberate pattern. Tap, 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 tap. Her heart leaped into her throat. She held her breath, listening. It came again. Tap, 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 tap. A signal. She scrambled to the door, pressing her ear against the cold wood. From the other side, so quiet she almost missed it, came his voice. It wasn't the guttural Ivor growl. It was lower, softer, a whisper of the man from the gallery. "Listen carefully. You have 5 minutes. The bolt is disengaged. When you hear a loud noise from the front, you run. Not to the front door, down the hall, to the left. There's a window at the end. It leads to a fire escape. Go down. Don't look back. Don't stop for anything." Sofia's mind raced. "What about you?" she whispered back, her voice trembling. A pause. "Don't worry about me. Just be ready to run. And Sofia, trust your training." The connection was severed. She heard the stool scrape as he stood up and walked away, his footsteps fading into the main room. She was alone again, but now every nerve ending was on fire. 5 minutes. She crept back to the mattress, slipping her feet into her ruined heels. They were terrible for running, but better than bare feet on broken glass and rusted metal. She flexed her hands, the phantom memory of Krav Maga drills surfacing from years ago. Trust your training. The 5 minutes felt like 5 lifetimes. Each second was a hammer blow against her ribs. She heard the low murmur of voices in the other room, Chase's voice, then Nico's, sharp and questioning. Her muscles coiled, ready to spring. The loud noise, when it came, was spectacular. It was the sound of shattering glass, a tremendous crash, followed immediately by Bear's roar of pain and surprise, and a string of guttural Russian curses from Nico. Chase had clearly accidentally knocked the large man's prized bottle of vodka off the table, directly onto the radio, creating a chaotic, attention-grabbing short-circuit of noise and flying glass. Now! Sofia didn't hesitate. She shoved the door open, it gave way with a gentle push, the bolt indeed not fully engaged, and burst into the hallway. She turned left, as instructed, sprinting on her toes to muffle the sound of her heels. Behind her, the chaos in the main room was escalating. "What did you do, you clumsy oaf?" "He pushed me." "Forget it. Check the girl." Sofia didn't look back. Her world narrowed to the hallway. At the end, just as he'd said, was a grimy window, its pane cracked and covered in filth. She fumbled with the rusted latch, her heart sinking as it refused to budge. Thud. A body hit the wall behind her. Grunts. A fist connecting with flesh. The fight had spilled into the hall. Chase was buying her time. Panic gave her strength. She slammed the heel of her hand against the stubborn latch. It gave with a screech of protesting metal. She shoved the window open, a cold blast of night air hitting her face. The fire escape was there, a rickety skeleton of wrought iron. She clambered out, the metal groaning under her weight. She started down, the steps icy and treacherous. "The window! She's at the window!" Stitches' voice shrieked from inside. A gunshot rang out, deafeningly loud in the confined space. A bullet sparked off the railing next to her hand. Sofia screamed, flinching away, losing her balance. She tumbled down the last few steps, landing in a heap on the cold, wet asphalt of the alley below. Pain lanced through her ankle. Footsteps pounded on the fire escape above. They were coming after her. She struggled to her feet, her ankle screaming in protest. She was limping, helpless. This was it. She had failed. They would drag her back, and Chase would be. A dark shape dropped from the fire escape above her, landing between her and her pursuers with a cat-like grace that was utterly at odds with his size. Chase. He turned, and for a single, breathtaking second, the mask of Ivor was completely gone. His face was a map of fury and focused intent, his eyes locking with hers. "Run!" he roared, his voice his own, the command absolute. Then he turned to face the threat. Stitches was first, scrambling down the ladder, a pistol in his hand. Chase moved faster than Sofia thought possible. He grabbed Stitches' wrist, twisting it with a brutal, precise motion. The bone snapped. The gun clattered to the ground. A sharp elbow to the temple, and Stitches went limp, slumping over the railing. Bear was next, bellowing with rage, filling the fire escape. Chase didn't try to match his brute strength. He used the man's momentum against him, sidestepping and driving a powerful kick into the back of his knee. Bear roared in pain, stumbling forward. Chase grabbed his head and slammed it, face first, into the iron railings with a sickening crunch. Bear slid down, motionless. It was over in seconds. Efficient. Devastating. This was no mercenary. This was the head of Thornsec, unleashed. Nico appeared in the window above, his face a mask of pure rage. He raised his pistol. "You bastard!" he screamed, firing. Chase shoved Sofia hard, sending her stumbling behind an overflowing dumpster as the bullet sparked off the pavement where she'd been standing. He returned fire with Stitches' discarded weapon, forcing Nico to duck back inside. The alley was a dead end. The only way out was past the safe house front, onto the street. Chase was at her side in an instant, his arm around her waist, hauling her to her feet. "Can you run?" he demanded, his breath coming in sharp gasps. She nodded, gritting her teeth against the pain in her ankle. "Yes. Stay with me." He half carried, half dragged her toward the mouth of the alley. Shouts came from behind them. Nico was rallying, coming down the internal stairs. They burst out onto the street. It was deserted, lit by the sickly orange glow of sodium vapor lights. A black sedan, its engine already running, screeched to a halt exactly at the alley's mouth. The passenger door flew open. Lena was behind the wheel, her face grim. "Get in!" she yelled. Chase practically threw Sofia into the back seat, diving in after her. "Go, go, go!" Lena slammed her foot on the accelerator. The sedan roared away just as Nico and another man spilled out of the butcher shop front door, guns blazing. A rear window exploded, showering them with glass. Sofia curled into a ball, her hands over her head, her body trembling uncontrollably. The car swerved violently, tires squealing, as Lena executed a series of frantic turns to lose any possible pursuit. After a minute of heart-stopping evasion, the driving smoothed out. The sounds of the city returned to normal. They were away. Silence descended inside the car, broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing and the wind whistling through the broken window. Sofia slowly uncurled herself. She was free. She was in a car, speeding away from her nightmare. She looked at the man beside her. Chase was leaning back against the seat, his eyes closed. A cut on his forehead was bleeding, a thin trail of red working its way down his temple. His knuckles were raw and bruised. He looked exhausted, battered, and utterly real. The billionaire security expert was gone. The cold mercenary was gone. All that was left was the man who had just fought a war for her in a filthy alley. He opened his eyes and turned to look at her. The storm in them had quieted, replaced by a deep, unwavering intensity. "Sofia," he said, her name a rough sigh on his lips. "Are you hurt?" The dam inside her broke. The fear, the tension, the betrayal, the relief, the dawning, terrifying understanding of what he had risked for her, it all came flooding out. She didn't answer. She just launched herself at him, her arms wrapping around his neck, her face burying itself in the leather of his jacket as she wept great, shuddering sobs of pure, unadulterated release. For a moment, he froze, stunned. Then, his arms came around her, strong and sure, holding her tightly against him. One hand came up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her disheveled hair. He held her as she shook, his own body trembling with a fading adrenaline rush and something else, something warmer and far more dangerous. He had infiltrated a den of wolves to save her. He had fought his way out. But as he held the sobbing heiress in his arms, Chase Thorne knew the most dangerous part of the mission was just beginning. The aftermath. The world returned in a blur of sterile light and hushed voices. The black sedan didn't stop at a hospital. It navigated a series of underground garages, transferring them to a larger, armored vehicle before finally arriving at a nondescript, ultra-modern building on the west side. A private medical wing, Lena explained tersely, owned by a silent partner of Thorne's sec. Sofia was processed with a quiet, devastating efficiency. A doctor with calm hands and a dispassionate manner examined her, treating the bruise on her cheek, cleaning the cuts from the broken window, and wrapping her sprained ankle. They drew blood, checked her vitals, and offered her a sedative, which she refused with a sharp shake of her head. The numbness of shock was wearing off, and in its place was a swirling vortex of emotions she couldn't begin to process. Through it all, Chase was a constant, silent presence. He stood by the door, a sentinel once more, but this time the threat was outside, not within. He had cleaned up, the blood washed from his face, a fresh bandage on his knuckles. He'd changed into a simple black sweater and trousers, the casual clothes making him seem both more approachable and more intimidatingly real. He spoke only to Lena in low tones, issuing commands about cleanup, data extraction, and client debrief. He was the billionaire security expert again, but Sofia could no longer see him as just that. The ghost of Ivor, the cold mercenary, still lingered in the hard set of his jaw. And the man who had held her in the back of the car, whose heart had hammered against her ear, was there too, a confusing third layer to the man she thought she knew. Once the doctor left, an awkward silence descended upon the room. The immediate danger was past. There was no more performance, no more hidden blades or silent signals. There was only the wreckage of their beginning, and the terrifying, unspoken thing that had grown in the darkness. "Your father is on his way," Chase said finally, his voice quiet, cutting through the quiet hum of the medical equipment. "He'll be here within the hour." Sofia nodded, staring at her hands resting on the stark white sheets. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling inadequate. For coming to get me." He flinched, almost imperceptibly. "It was my job." The words were like a dash of cold water. "Your job," she repeated flatly. "Right, because my father pays your retainer." "Sofia." He took a step forward, then stopped, as if remembering he no longer had a role to play that allowed him to get close. "Was any of it real?" The question burst out of her, raw and unfiltered. She looked up, her eyes glistening. The coldness, the offer to take my ear, was that just part of the job too? A necessary performance? His composure cracked. For the first time since she'd known him, Chase Thorne looked truly unnerved. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure frustration. "God, no." Sofia, every second of that was... He struggled for the word, his voice gravelly with emotion. "It was agony. Looking at you, seeing you hurt, seeing you look at me like I was a monster. I have never hated a cover more in my life." "Then why?" she pleaded, the dam breaking. "Why not just tell me? One word? A signal?" "Because the walls had ears, and Nico was a professional," he said, his voice low and intense. "The slightest crack, the faintest whisper of doubt in your eyes, and he would have known. He would have killed us both. The only way to keep you safe was to make you believe the lie as completely as they did. I had to make you hate me to save you. It was the worst calculus I have ever had to make." The truth of it washed over her, awful and profound. He had shouldered her hatred, her devastating betrayal, to keep her alive. He had chosen to be the villain in her story to ensure she had one. "I called you a gargoyle," she whispered, a fresh wave of guilt swamping her. "I fired you. I was so arrogant. This was all my fault." "No." The word was sharp, absolute. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, stopping at the edge of her bed. He didn't touch her, but his presence was overwhelming. "Your fault? Sofia, you were right." She stared at him, bewildered. "What?" "You were right," he repeated, his gaze burning into hers. "I was overbearing, I was condescending. I walked into your gallery and saw a problem to be managed, an asset to be secured. I didn't see you, not the you that mattered. I didn't see your strength, your intelligence, your fierce independence. If I had, I would have approached you differently. I would have earned your trust instead of demanding it. My failure that day led to this. So, no, none of this is your fault. It's mine." It was the last thing she expected to hear. An apology, not for his actions undercover, but for his actions in her sun-drenched gallery. It was more disarming than any confession of love could have been. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they were different now, cleansing. "You saved my life." "You saved your own life," he corrected her, his voice softening. "You kept your head. You found the blade. You were ready when I gave the signal. You were magnificent." The word was a reverent whisper. "I've never seen anyone handle themselves like that." A watery laugh escaped her. She wiped her tears away with the back of her hand. "So what happens now?" she asked softly. "Now," he said, his eyes searching hers. "That depends on you. The threat is neutralized. My team has Nico and his men in custody. The eyes of the ancients are secure. Your father will arrive and you will be safe. My job is done." He said the last words with a finality that made her heart clench. Done. He was waiting to be dismissed. Again. Sofia looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes, the lingering shadow of the violence he had committed on her behalf, the vulnerability he showed to no one but her. She saw the man who had fought his way through hell not for a paycheck but for her. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his bandaged knuckles. He went perfectly still at her touch. "What if I don't want it to be done?" she whispered. His breath caught. He turned his hand over, palm up, and her fingers slid into his. The connection was electric, a completed circuit after days of torturous silence. "Sofia," he breathed, a warning, a prayer. "You told me to trust my training," she said, her voice gaining strength. "My training tells me that the most valuable things are rarely easy to acquire. They require patience, care, respect." She tightened her grip on his hand. "I think I fired the wrong person. I don't need a security team, Chase, but I think I might need you." He finally closed the distance between them. His free hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently tracing the edge of the bruise there. His touch was infinitely gentle, a stark contrast to the violence he was capable of. "You have me," he said, his voice raw with a truth he could no longer contain. "You had me the moment you threw me out of your gallery. I just didn't know it yet." He leaned forward and his lips met hers gently. When they finally broke apart, foreheads resting together, the door to the room hissed open. Eduardo Valdez stood frozen in the doorway, his face a mask of panic that slowly morphed into stunned disbelief as he took in the scene. His daughter, safe but bruised, in a hospital room, holding hands with and very clearly having just kissed the head of the security firm she'd fired. Chase began to pull away, to stand and assume a professional distance, but Sofia held fast to his hand. "Papa," she said, her voice clear and steady, filled with a new, unshakable authority. "This is Chase. You've met. We've renegotiated the terms of his employment." A slow smile spread across Chase's face, a real, genuine smile that transformed his features, banishing the last of Ivor's ghost. He brought her fingers to his lips and kissed them, his eyes never leaving hers. The game was over. The real story had just begun.
Enjoyed the story? Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one.